Hi, I'm Dave from Premier Fire Doors, and today we're going to show you how to measure for a replacement door and also a door and frame. This is the door in question. What we're going to do to start with is open the door fully. If you've got a wedge, to wedge the door or get an assistant to wedge it open for you, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to measure 3 measurements on the width. So this is called the rebate. You can see the red, that's a smoke seal. So we're going to measure from that rebate to that rebate type measurement. So if I do it now at the top first, so I put the tape measure against the top and measure that, and that's measuring around 925, so that's 925 millimeters. So we do the same again halfway down the door, because we need to know if the door is square, the door frame is square. So again, we do it and it's the same measurement, 925. And finally, we do a third measurement, again, across the rebate, and that is 925. So that frame is nice and square. Once we've done the width measurement times 3, we're then going to measure from the finished floor level. And here we've got a finished floor of tiles, and we're going to take 2 measurements, one on the left hand side, and we measure that at 2040. So that's one measurement, and then we're going to do the same again on the right hand side of the frame, and we're going to measure again to the underside, so that part there, which is the rebate again, and it's 2045. So there's a slight difference in height. Okay, so once you've done the measurements, one thing to remember on the floor level, if the floor isn't the finished floor level, say you were having a carpet or some cushion flooring, and that height was an extra 10 millimeters, just remember that you need to take off that total height, that 10 millimeters. So these measurements are what we call type measurements. And then we will, at Premier Fire Doors, take off further millimeters. What we do, we take 6 millimeters off your measurements on your type measurements to give us a gap for the door to close, and we take off 8 millimeters for the height, and that allows us 3 mil at the top of the door gap so it can close, and 5 mil at the bottom. One other stipulation is that if you do require an FD30S, so a fire door system, fire door set that is smoke stopping, then the maximum gap at the bottom of that door is going to be 3 millimeters. If you can't achieve the 3 millimeters because the floor isn't level, so that when you open the door back, so you may get 3 mil gap when the door is closed, but when you open the door and you end up with a floor that's not level, you may not be able to open that door fully. So please bear that in mind when you are taking your measurements. Again, measure 3 on the width across, 2 on the height, all in millimeters, and then we will then know exactly the size of the door to make for you. We're now going to measure a fire door frame. The difficulty you will have when measuring a frame, there may well be what's called architrave that covers the depth of the frame. So the difficulty is knowing whether that is a fire frame. Generally, if your door is 44 millimeters thick, which this one is, and that is a 44mm rebate, then there's a good chance this is a fire frame already. But if you need to replace it for damage, etc., then what you need to do, and the best way to do it, is take the measurement rebate to rebate, like we showed you before on measuring the door, from there to there, and then add 64mm, which is 32 either side, which is the normal thickness of the frame, which has to be 32 to be a 5 frame. So if you were actually measuring it, your frame would end up being somewhere in this region here. But you can't tell that is the case because you've got architrave. So the only thing to do then, you'd have to remove the architrave all the way round, and you'd have to then take your 3 measurements as before, but you're measuring the outside of the frame once you've removed the architrave. So that is probably going to be 960. And again, you do it 3 times, same measurement, that gives you the width. And then you do the same again for the height. But when you're doing the height from finished floor level again, what you have to do is allow that 32mm on top of your 240. That will give you your outside frame measurement. Once you've got the outside frame measurement, then you can allow a gap between that and the opening that the frame is going to fit into. But if you then contact us, we can explain that further. One other point to bear in mind when you're replacing the door is on the height. I mentioned that under normal circumstances, you take the finished floor level to the under rebate level, which is this part here. So you're measuring from the finished floor to the underside of the rebate, and what happens then is that's tight measurement. When those measurements come in, the workshops will then take off another 8mm, which allows for 3mm at the top and 5mm at the bottom. I did mention about smoke stopping, that 5mm then has to reduce to 3mm, but what we're finding is floor levels are no longer level, and so it's very difficult to accommodate a 3mm gap at the bottom of the door. So what we produce then on the bottom of the door is we can then leave the 5mm gap, but we can install a rise and fall smoke seal, and that will give you the seal at the base of the door, or we can even put a threshold strip in with a smoke seal across the base of the door. So you would have a piece of wood or metal which would run across the door, which would be a threshold strip, usually about 15mm deep, with a smoke seal in it. So when the door closes, it closes onto that bottom threshold strip as well. That gives you the full smoke control of an FD30 fire door, FD30S fire door. Just one final point on measuring doors to bear in mind: when it's a double door, the height measurements are exactly the same, but the width measurements go across the double doors, and you do rebate to rebate exactly the same as you do for the single door. And then we can take off not just 6mm, we take 9mm, because obviously you've got the gap between your double doors.